Hi friends, welcome to my channel. So my name is Arun Gangadhar. So today we are going to discuss about the Linux fundamentals. See, when you want to start a career in the IT, so operating system fundamentals is very important. So because if you know the fundamentals of the any operating system, so you can work in many of the departments in the IT, like you can work in the admin department, or you can work in the support engineer for the application, or you can work as a cloud engineer, or you can work as a DevOps engineer also. For DevOps, Linux is basic fundamentals. If you know Linux, you can understand DevOps concepts. So it's very easy. Like so, to troubleshoot and to optimize any issue, so Linux fundamentals are mandatory. So today we will discuss about the Linux fundamentals. So Linux, actually firstly we will discuss about the how Linux has evolved and who has developed Linux. Basically Linux is a part of Unix like systems. Initially there was a operating system called Unix, like in the 1990s. So in Unix there are some bugs are there, some defects are there in the Unix system. So after some time, so there is a guy called Linus Torvalds who has identified bugs in the Unix operating system, and he made his own changes on the Unix operating system. Like so he identified some bugs and he made his own changes by using. So Linus Torvalds made changes on Unix systems using a OS called Minix. So Linus Torvalds has used Minix OS to fix the bugs which has produced by Unix system. So after he made changes by using the Minix OS, so he has given actually name called Linux. So he has given a name called Linux. So how this name comes means, so in his name the first two letters he took, and the operating system which he used to fix the bugs in the Unix systems is Minix, right? So in the last three names he took that, so he combined these two names and he made a name called Linux. So that is the history of Linux. Like initially it was comes under the Unix system. So later there is a guy called Linus Torvalds, he who identified some bugs in the Unix system, and he made his own changes by using some OS called Minix. So then he named as Linux. So after he made his changes and he has named as Linux, so he distributed this Linux OS as a open source project. So open source means anybody can use the source code, and they can make their own changes on top of the source code. So basically Linux has lot of distributions. Like Linux has over 200 plus distributions. So Linux has lot of distributions. So we can name some of them, like Red Hat, like generally we will call as RHEL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Ubuntu, CentOS, Debian, Fedora, SUSE, Kali. There are some different Linux are there. Amazon has developed their own Amazon Linux. So there is advantages with the open source project called we can make our own changes on top of the source code. So then only that projects we will call as open source project. So these are the main flavors organizations will use generally. So there are some other flavors also there, but there are mostly these flavors generally organizations will use to develop their applications. So coming to Linux has a great advantage when compared with the other OS. So first we will discuss about the Linux features. So Linux has the more flexibility feature when compared with the others. Like it is a portable. Portable in the sense this Linux software can works on different types of hardware in same way. I mean like Linux kernel and application program supports their installation on any kind of hardware platform. Like so portable means software can works on different types of hardware in same way. I mean if you change your underlying hardware also, the working nature of the Linux won't change. So it works same way in all the underlying hardware. And as we discussed, this is the open source project. So anyone can make changes on source code. So anybody can make their own changes and they can make their own product. And also this is the multi-user operating system. I mean to say multi-user means multiple users can access your system resources like memory, RAM and application programs at the same time. Multiple system users can access your system resources at the same time. Basically in Windows, if you observe, so if some other user wants to log in, the current user should be logged out, then the other user should be logging. So in Linux we can log in multiple users at a time. So that is the benefit when we compare with the Windows. And also this is the multi-programming also. Linux has multi-programming feature. So multi-programming in the sense like multiple applications can run at the same time. And also it has a feature called shell. Shell is the interpreter which takes user inputs and it forwards to the operating system kernel. It is a interpreter in Linux which can execute user commands. So it will execute user commands and it will pass that commands to the kernel. So and also the main feature is security. So when it comes to security part, Linux has more advantage when compared with the Windows. Like it uses some authentication features like password protection, and it has some controlled access to the system. Controlled access to the system means specific files. I mean we can restrict users to access only specific files. Those type of underlying settings we can do in the Linux OS. And also we can encrypt our data using some algorithms. So these are the main features which Linux has when compared with the other operating system. Like it is a portable means the Linux operating system is will work on different types of hardware in the same way. So it is also open source. I mean anybody can use the operating system and they can make their own changes. And it is also multi programming, like multiple application can run at the same time, and multi-user operating system also, like multiple users can run at the same time and they can use the system resources. It has a great feature called shell, which it acts as an interpreter which helps us to interact with the kernel to do our activities. And also when it comes to security part, Linux has the more advantage when compared with the other operating systems in the market. So now we will discuss about the architecture of Linux. See, if you are learning something, you should understand the architecture of that product, so that you will easily understand the underlying concepts. So the first layer is the Linux architecture contains hardware. See, any operating system should install on top of the hardware only. So here we will install our OS. So OS has a programmer called, it's a logical component called kernel. So basically we will talk about the kernel after some time. So on top of the kernel, it has a interpreter called shell. Shell is an interpreter which takes user inputs and it passes to the backend kernel. So on top of the shell, generally we will install our application and we will do our activities. So applications. So hardware means, like a CPU, RAM, something like that, hard disk and other stuff. So basically any operating system we will install on top of the hardware only. So when it comes to after installing the operating system, Linux has a core programmer called kernel. So basically kernel is the main feature of the Linux OS. If you perform any activity in the Linux operating system, kernel is the main functionality to give output to the any activity which performed by the user. Basically, so when you execute any command in the Linux, the command, the shell will takes that command and it will forward to the kernel. So kernel will perform that command and it will interact with the CPU, RAM, and it will give the output to the user end of the day. So like firstly we will have a hardware. So on top of the hardware we will install our Linux OS. So OS has the kernel, which is the core programmer in the OS. Like it is a logical component, not a physical device. So kernel is actually comes with the operating system only. In the hardware we do not have any kernel features. Only when you install Linux operating system we will get the kernel. So on top of the kernel there is a interpreter called shell. Shell is the interpreter is nothing but, so it sits between two phases and it will give some, it will take some input and it will give some outputs. So like whenever I perform some like Linux command like ls. So ls is the Linux command, we will discuss that later. So when I type ls in the shell, so the shell takes this as an input and it will forward that to the kernel. So kernel will know what ls should perform. So it will perform that activity and it will give output to the user. So this is the basic architecture of Linux, like hardware, and we have Linux operating system, and on top of that there is a shell is there. So by shell, which is the main interface for the users, which will act as an interpreter which takes input from the user and it will forward that inputs to the backend kernel. So kernel will talk to the underlying infrastructure like CPU, RAM, and hard disk, and it will write some data if needed, and it will give output to the user. So this is the basic architecture of Linux. So I hope you understand. So thanks for joining. We will see next session.